be to God. How many of you here and outside, although I cannot see, but how many of you here have watched and liked the movie The Lion King? Most of us, right? And for me, it's one of my favorite movies. I've always loved watching it, and even today when I watch it, it brings out the child in me. I just love watching The Lion King. It is an 1994 American animated musical drama produced by Walt Disney, as all of you know. The Lion King tells the tale or story of this young lion, a Swahili lion, and his name is Simba, and his father in the movie is Mufasa. You know, Disney has a way of connecting with all of us, resonating with who we are and what we're experiencing and what we yearn for. The Lion King earned 2 Oscars, one for the soundtrack made by Elton John and Tim Rice. It was the highest grossing animated film, just shy of $1 billion, until 2010 when Toy Story 3 surpassed it. It still holds 3rd place with Frozen way up there on top. The movie's magic, like all the good art and the photography and the cinematography, is because it speaks to the human condition, our condition. The gospel then is God's response to our human condition, to God's response to us. The opening scene of the movie where the new lion prince named Simba is consecrated and presented to the community reminds me of baptism, especially with the beam of light breaking through the clouds. Perhaps we can see Jesus in Simba, with the Magi coming to worship him. That's the image that I get when I watch that scene. We know that in the Bible, Jesus is called the King and the Lion. Or perhaps in Simba, we can see ourselves. We are all born with a purpose, an identity, a destiny. It reminds us both of Jesus and ourselves. The first part of the movie is a story of a father and son. King Mufasa, the father, is trying to raise his son in wisdom and leadership, wanting to equip him to someday be able to live up to into his own destiny. And now in a lot of ways, it reminds us of our duties with our children as a parent. All these questions that spin in our mind non-stop. When I look at my boys, I think, gosh, they're growing up so fast. They're not just, how are they doing? Am I parenting right? What do they need to know for growing not just physically or emotionally or in education, but in character and personality and in their identity? Do they know who they are? Do they know that God created them for a purpose, for a destiny? Do I remind them of that enough in ways that form them? Are they growing up into it? How do you shape that? In fact, this movie reminds us that in reality, our kids don't do what we say. They do what we do. They learn from watching us. But a lot of times, don't we usually get that backwards? We like to say, do what I say, not what I do. But then they do exactly what we do and not necessarily what we tell them to do. I see this a lot in my son. He follows and repeats everything that I say and do, but hardly does he do anything that I tell him to do. You know? Well, when Mufasa shows Simba the extent of their kingdom, he tells his son explicitly not to go into the elephant graveyard. And of course, Simba disobeys and goes there. What he didn't know was that this is where the hyenas lurked. He and his friends get into a mess and they're almost eaten. Luckily, he is rescued by his dad, and then comes the talk time. So as you're thinking about how you are shaping those that God has given under your influence, let us take a minute or a moment to think first about ourselves. What do you see, or what do they see you doing? What do you look like when they see you at your worst? You see, as parents who follow Jesus, We first come to know that we are children of God. And then we help our kids see that they too are the children of God. It is our job to shape our kids' identity as God's children. We must continually remind them that they are our kids, yes, but more than that, that they are God's kids too. They need to remember who they are, because 1 John chapter 3 verse 1 says, "See what kind of love the Father has given to us, in that we should be called God's children, and that is what we are." We need to model that they are the children of God. Mufasa is trying to shape Simba's identity, and we as godly parents are to try to shape our kids' identity. We see that a lot in the Bible, especially when it goes all the way back to Jacob in Genesis. Jacob is Abraham's grandson, and Jacob has 12 sons himself. One of them was Joseph with the coat of many colors. And when Jacob is nearing death, he calls in his 12 sons and proclaims a blessing over each one of them. He gives them each a word, a description, an identity. It seems that God inspired this blessing because in the end they all came true. Well, when he gets to his fourth son, Judah, he breaks out into this word saying, "You are a lion's cub, Judah. You return from prey, my son. Like a lion he crouches and lies down, like a lioness who dares to rouse him. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his." Jacob calls Judah his son a lion. And then he says that the scepter, the royal lineage, the royal line, will always be his descendants. And he even goes so far as to say that all the nations would obey a special king. Now back then they did not know what that probably meant. There would be no kings among these people for nearly 1,000 years. But finally, when David is king, the greatest king the Hebrews ever knew, the people wondered, could this now be the fulfillment of Jacob's ancient prophecy? But still, the nations did not obey him. There must still be a greater one coming. And his prophecy gets linked to the Messiah who is to come. So another 1,000 years later, by the time the end of the New Testament, the people are still waiting for this Messiah king. Friends, throughout the Bible, the promised Messiah king is called a lion. And in the Chronicles of Narnia that we all like and we read, King Aslan is a Jesus figure, is a lion as well. Even the last book of the Bible in Revelation, which shows the end times, again the Lion King appears. John the Apostle in Revelation 5:5 records his vision saying, "Then one of the elders said to me, 'Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scrolls and its 7 seals.'" Jesus is foretold as the Lion of the tribe of Judah, a descendant of King David, and even greater king than he. He wins victory over sin and death by dying on the cross, and at the end times, all nations do have to obey him. He is the victorious king. Now, the later part of the movie is about Simba and Scar. Scar represents the dark side. He is Mufasa's brother, and he wants to become a king. So he devises a plot to kill both Simba and Mufasa. You see, Scar seems to also represent the dark side in each one of us. Jealousy and coveting and power and control and status. We are supposed to be scared of Scar partly because we also see him in ourselves. The Bible calls this our sinful nature. We are deep down selfish. We are each drawn to it, and it's scary. Because being selfish draws us to those things that not only hurt ourselves, but even those that we love. It makes no sense, but it is true, because when we are selfish, we stop thinking, and when we are drawn towards sin. Making sense does not matter anymore. It has an appetite all of its own. When we think of evil, we think of Stalin or Hitler. They killed to have power. In the movie, there is a scene of Scar commanding the hyenas who are marching in goose steps like the Nazis. In the Bible, it is Satan who leads it. He was the first to give in to selfishness and rebel against God. And unfortunately, in the Bible, Satan is also represented as a lion. For 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8 says, "Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour." And the movie represents this very well. Scar sets up the plot, a plot filled with lies and hate that cost Mufasa his life, and later Scar takes advantage of the situation and tells Simba it was all his fault and tells him to run away and never come back. The word devil means slanderer. The word Satan means accuser. Revelation says that Satan accuses us. He tells us that it is all our fault, that our sin is just so great, that God could never love us, that we could never, ever be forgiven. This is the great lie of Satan. And so, when we give into the selfishness, the darkness inside, we then have to run away. We run away from who we are. We run away from God's plan for our lives, our destiny, for who we are and who we were created to be. And when Simba runs away, Scar takes over the Pride Lands. He gets what he wanted, but he rules so badly that everything is thrown out of balance and the lands are slowly destroyed. Now, out in the wilderness, Simba is adopted by two carefree critters. They teach Simba that the way to survive is to simply forget all that is past. Live in the present and do not care about anything, and hence the song Hakuna Matata, which means no worries. And so Simba forgets where he comes from and who he was and all of his family and his responsibilities back home. He deals with his guilt by not worrying about it. This is the phrase that a prodigal son lived by in Jesus' story. He simply forgot about all the past, but eventually the emptiness inside becomes too much to ignore. Same with the movie. The family back home is living in despair, and one of them discovers Simba by accident and reaches out to Simba to help. His past caught up with him, and now Simba has a choice to make. Friends, a lot of times we are like Simba. We forget who we are. We may even reject who we are. We live in the moment, hoping to forget all the guilt that has piled upon us. But the emptiness inside becomes too much. We are God's children, and God has a claim on us. Even if we ignore and reject it, God has a purpose and a destiny for each and every one of us. We will only be whole if we live into it. Running away from our guilt can be so painful and empty, and Hakuna Matata can only work for a while. Let us remember that as God's children, we are all called for a purpose. There is a greater plan for our lives. Remember who you are and keep remembering. Every time you take a shower, every time you take a bath, I want you to remember that you are baptized. As a child of God, that you have a greater identity. Simba goes back. He confronts his fears and guilt. It is hard and a battle ensues, but we know how it ends. And this is why we like movies like this, because we know how it ends. For Revelation chapter 7 verses 16 and 17 says, "Never again will they hunger, never again will they thirst. The sun will not beat upon them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd, and he will lead them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes." Friends, we need to ask God to help shape our God-given identity, which in turn helps us shape our children and help them nurture in their God-given identity. Let us surrender the inner scar that we all struggle with, for it only leads to pain and destruction eventually. Stop forgetting and remember who you are. You and I and we all together are the children of the one true God. We all are the children of the eternal King. And no matter what you and I are walking through right now, know that it will not be that way forever. Because in the end, the Lion King wins. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit.